markets, policy, culture, iconoclast, short pump. Full disclosure, we are here live with Abigail Spanberger. That's right, the three-term swing district congresswoman is now running for governor of Virginia. We'll discuss the headlines and her career journey live here at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture in Richmond, so do stay with us. Joining us on stage at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture is Abigail Spanberger, three-term congresswoman, swing state impresario, who's now running for governor of Virginia. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Where does it start? You're in this donut hole, whatever, this interregnum between Congress and running for
unemployment.
office. It's kind of unemployment, but it's gainful unemployment.
Yeah.
If I was to bump into you at an event, and Henrico used to be my congresswoman in the old 7th District, I would buttonhole you right now about foreign affairs, and I feel like at least I want to get a little of that in.
Sure.
How do you get your mind over, as being an intelligence person, a CIA veteran, person who was looked at for foreign policy wisdom on your time on the Hill, how do you get your hands around Syria just suddenly falling, and the vacuum in the Middle East, and the situation with Gaza, and the unprecedented nature of the President of the United States calling for the annexation of Gaza into a redevelopment? I know that's a lot, but I got to get some foreign stuff in.
And the relocation of 2 million people. It's stunning, is actually really how I would address it. The reality is that, as a former intelligence officer, I was on the Intel Committee when I was in Congress as well. This moment is a precarious one, and it's happening in tandem with just a movement to obliterate the State Department and diplomacy, and the pillars of American defense. It's defense, diplomacy, and development. And at a time when the development piece of it, everything that's happening through USAID, is just being set aside, cast aside, at a time when diplomacy is being kind of relegated, I think in a pretty disruptive and difficult way. And we find ourselves in this place where, the world continues to be a dangerous one. I wish I had something more positive or uplifting to say, but we have, utterly unfit people, and I say that's not a political or partisan statement. We have utterly unfit people who are being moved towards the highest levels within this administration, whether it's now the Secretary of Defense or the nominees for, FBI director, so those who are tasked with avoiding and preventing attacks on the homeland. The DNI is, just utterly unfit for that role. So it's deeply, deeply worrisome.
Is it too easy to look back at a history lesson of kind of Marshall Plan and coming out of World War II, for example, for something like Syria, which is such a vacuum right now, and there are players like Iran were kicked out clearly, but Turkey vying for supremacy there, Russia having rump. I'm just still so blindsided by it. It was on nobody's bingo card just a couple of months ago.
Yeah. I think that this is the place where, the United States being in a position of global leadership, marshaling our allies to the table, trying to understand what is the lay of the land, whether it's through some level of diplomatic engagement or, importantly, through intelligence collection and understanding. Where things are going to go in the next 3 to 6 months remains to be seen. But certainly the risks to the United States continue to be great. But the instability that exists in the larger Middle East is clear. We see already Hamas, as of the moment that we are taping this, is postponing the release of the next round of hostages. And so the circumstance continues to be dire, and having U.S. global leadership center stage is something that has always been consequential and essential to our own national security and the security of our partners, certainly throughout Europe, but broadly through the Middle East as well. And it's a precarious time.
And Virginia has no shortage of federal employees, right? Where does Virginia end and Washington begin? That's always the existential question.
Yeah. Bringing it to Virginia. And this becomes the question when we're looking at the potential for all of these layoffs or efforts to try and push federal employees out, so many of them are Virginians. And so it is certainly about the livelihoods. It's about, individual people, but it's also about the missions that they serve. It's about the larger community and economy, certainly broadly across Northern Virginia. And so as someone, with the national security background, but now running for governor in Virginia, all of the disruptions that we've seen at the federal level, certainly they concern me from a national security perspective and from a kind of an international perspective, given my background. But they are deeply concerning as it relates to the economy of Virginia, as it relates to the stability of Virginians in their home and in our Commonwealth. And certainly it is chief among my concerns of what's going to happen over the next couple of months, the next couple of years under this administration.
I have to ask you, because I've reported on him as an auto mogul and as somebody who bought Twitter and a person who sends up rockets, and he's a social media hero to a lot of people. But Elon Musk has kind of become his own branch of government. It's really truly stranger than fiction for me. We thought that it would have stopped at the Twitter acquisition, but then he went whole hog political in this latest campaign. And not that, when you're worth north of $400 billion and you can descend in and even get read-only access to various departments in the administration, I don't know where, we're taught about checks and balances in the 7th grade civics, and I don't know where that fits in the grand scheme, or if there's a precedent for that.
There's no precedent. And it wasn't taught in civics class, because there's this, I think it's a little bit of a pervasive mentality that's been brought in with this administration, and I think that Mr. Musk sort of illustrates it, or is the embodiment of it, which is a total lack of understanding of mission or service-focused mindset. And as we look at the assessment of what's happening, at the federal level, when we look at the assessment that, let's just axe X percentage of the federal workforce, surely that will, as they seem to think, surely that will turn out just fine. There's a lack of understanding of what it means to do a job because you believe in it, not because the paycheck is, the best there is, not because of the benefits and the snack tables and all the things they have in Silicon Valley, but because you believe in it, because you are serving a purpose, you are serving a mission, and when we're talking about federal employees, like we're talking about nurses at the VA, we're talking about the person who processes the Social Security payment for Virginians across our Commonwealth and people across the country. We're talking about the FBI agents who are investigating transnational criminal organizations or preventing a terrorist threat. We are talking about the TSA agents. We are talking about Border Patrol, right? The list of who we're talking about, researchers, right, who devote themselves to curing disease, right? Those are the federal employees that they just kind of summarily don't necessarily understand that purpose or that mission. And so when you have someone who has kind of spent his entire career being disruptive and having that kind of land in generally, good places from a perspective of a business person, it's disconnected from the role of government, right? When Twitter crashed for quite some time, for a period of time, like you can't have that happen with the provision of care at the VA. You can't have that happen with Social Security payments. It's apples to oranges, and the fact that there's this outside of government role, just sort of taking a kind of an axe to the government is highly problematic.
So what are the checks remaining? You have some public officials, some bureaucrats participating in nonviolent, non-cooperation. There's only so much you could do. You literally saw some of your colleagues at the door of USAID, up to somebody. You cannot imagine sharing this tableau with your 2010 or 2005 self, but it has come to pass. And yes, we've had an attempted insurrection, and there still remains this pungent disdain for a lot of what Washington bureaucracy is. So it's this conundrum.
Yeah. Well, and this is where I'll sort of point back to the states. Certainly other states we see the attorneys general who are, I think, doing important work of making sure that they're trying to lead cases to stop so much of the chaos that is being brought to the states. We aren't currently in that position to have an attorney general willing to stand up for Virginians in that way. But Speaker of the House, Don Scott, within the General Assembly, has stood up a bipartisan committee to look at the impact of the attack on federal workers and the impact on Virginia's economy. Because the reality is, certainly representing so many federal employees during my time in Congress, I can tell you that it isn't just, of course, the federal employees who are impacted by types of disruption. Now, firings across the board or severances across the board is even more disruptive than the threat of government shutdowns or shutdowns. But when there are government shutdowns, Virginia is the most impacted state. And we're impacted, we've always been impacted, not just because there's federal employees who are not getting their paychecks or there's government contractors who are not getting their paychecks, but because the larger economy is linked back to that service. And so whether it's the small family-owned appliance store that, if you don't know if you're going to get a paycheck, or if you don't know if you might be let go, you're not going to replace your refrigerator that's on the fritz, right? If you don't know if you might be the next round of forced out federal employees, you may not take your family out to a nice dinner. And so the impact on the economy across Virginia, it is significant, and it will be significant. And so it's important, the work that the General Assembly and this bipartisan group that Speaker Scott has created is going to be doing to really take a look at and make sure that we are, as a Commonwealth, paying close attention to the impact of the disruptions that we are already seeing and the ones we'll continue to see.
Congresswoman, what is woke? I think that it was coined around the 2018 midterms or after Trump's initial election. There was a hashtag, stay woke, be vigilant. It kind of spoke to a more open-mindedness and get more people to vote and show up at the midterms. But and I hate using the verb weaponize, but it's become a bit noir and something that you see Fox News and MAGA very successfully ran against.
So I'll defer to Wikipedia to give the full history of the word. But I think that, those across the aisle or those who want to, just be critical will use it to criticize anything that they might agree with or disagree with, excuse me.
So it's just this Rorschach for what? For one perspective might be open-mindedness, others will be diversity. It could just be an easier euphemism for diversity or a way to kind of weaponize it or put it out there. I'm anti-woke. You saw they're more sophisticated ways of saying we don't want our kids learning critical race theory. There are people who are outright hate pronouns, very openly anti-woke, whatever woke is. And I still come back to the question of what is that? It's really amorphous.
Yeah. Well, and I think it becomes a question of, for the folks who want to be anti-everything. So what is it when they say that they are anti-woke or anti-DEI, anti? Because I think the counterpoint is, like, what are you for, right? I mean, I am for a... I'm for a community where we celebrate people and celebrate especially in the Museum of History and Culture, to celebrate our history, to celebrate our culture, right? Our failings and our successes. I think that there should be, there's pride and there's importance in recognizing kind of who we are as a community or a Commonwealth in this particular location's circumstance. Or, I am for diverse and inclusive and representative communities and a government that's focused on mission. And so I think that, everything coming out of Washington and frankly, down the street at times in the Capitol is anti, but sometimes I think people really just want to know what it is that we're actually for.
You were a torchbearer for LGBT rights in Capitol Hill. And we've noticed right now, it's become, talking to friends and family, it's a time of fear and consternation for parents of gender fluid kids. Like, you never really would have imagined that it would have been weaponized so successfully in the election. And now every head of various departments is trying to purge any element of trans. Yes, there are national bans of gender fluid people playing in girls' sports. what are the protections for mom and pop? Because as you know, this cuts across religions. We know Orthodox Jewish people, parents who are dealing with this. We know atheist parents, Republican parents, Democratic parents. It's a universal issue, and I'm definitely hearing that right now, that it's kind of become an open season. When at the very top you can be openly anti-trans, that's going to trickle down to the elementary school level.
I think, and as a parent of 3 school-aged kids, for me the question is, when did it become okay to just pick on children, right? That's for me. Because there's, we can have very adult conversations about very adult things, but at the end of the day, it's hard to be a kid. It's hard to be a kid and not be 100% sure who you are, who you're going to be when you grow up, and that's before you ever get into issues of, full-on identity, right? Like, what do you wear to school today, right? It's hard to be a kid, and the idea that you could have, be it the president or a governor or anyone in elected office, for political gain, kind of using you as a talking point. As a parent, I find it so objectionable. And as a parent, it removes all the rights that exist for somebody else's ability to parent, right? You can't, if you are watching your child be used as a political foil, right? How do you as a parent, not be able to protect your child from that? I think adults need to do much, much, much better, for those kids, but also because it's hard enough to be a kid, right? I mean, and especially if you're under 18, school closures and the pandemic and, all the other things that go into being a kid, and the idea that you might really be the political foil for the president of the United States. I find it so shameful and so objectionable. And again, what are we for, right? What are we for?
Full disclosure, I'm Robin Farzad. We are live with Abigail Spanberger, 3-time Congresswoman in Virginia, at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture in Richmond, Virginia. Abigail Spanberger is running for governor of Virginia. This is a hotly contested, always looked at, us in New Jersey, I believe, in the first year after the presidential election. So you've been getting no shortage of national press in the New York Times. I remember when you were first elected, SNL had you as one of the freshman women of Congress. And so increasingly, and I believe it was Liz Cheney who came to the Richmond Forum here and gave you a shout out, which is again, but
the things I never thought would happen.
Yeah, no. We go back in the time machine, let's say 2008, 2005. If I told you in a crystal ball, this is Dick Cheney, this is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, they're voting for the same presidential candidate in 2024, and you would have to kind of backwards organize that for me.
No, my head would explode.
Having said that, there is a tremendous amount of hand-wringing and reflection right now in the Democratic Party. You've been very front and center in the past. You said, I remember Joe Biden was not elected to be FDR. He was elected to be competent and to clean things up. You told the party not to run on socialism or defund the police, to be so easily boogeymaned like this. So the question is, right now, this messaging is so difficult coming out of this. Surely you remember that the Republican Party, after Romney lost, summoned that autopsy, and then they ripped it up, and Trump ran in 2016, and it became the biggest upset. What's going to come out of this party right now? Surely you saw that Molly Ball piece in the Wall Street Journal. There are tremendous different directions that the party's being pulled.
I will say, I have a couple different comments on this. One, I think if you look to places where some of my former colleagues on the ballot performed so well and were reelected either to Congress, or some of them ran for Senate, and those who ran and won in Michigan and Arizona, so Alyssa Slok and Ruben Gallego as 2 examples, they won on the ballot at the same time that Trump won on the ballot. And knowing both of them, I think it speaks to who they are as candidates, who they are as legislators, and how it is that they communicate, which is to listen, to be engaged, to be of and for their communities, whether it was their congressional district or now their entire states. And really for me, I'm focused on Virginia. I don't thankfully need to learn the issues, right, that are important in Michigan or Arizona. That's for Ruben, that's for Alyssa. But in Virginia, I know that the path towards winning, yes, but the path towards being able to govern well and be a good governor starts with attempting to be everywhere, listening to people everywhere, and then recognizing that, so many of the issues that matter to people, whether it's in Southwest or South Side or Hampton Roads or Northern Virginia or Central Virginia, right, they're similar. They're variations on similar themes, but sometimes they do manifest differently. And to be able to both understand the nuanced challenges, right? If it's infrastructure is always important, right? Some places it's roads and bridges, and some places it's broadband connectivity, or some places it's electrical grid or water infrastructure. And so being able to know community to community or region to region.
It's a hard line to walk. Like imagine being, you say I'm a mother, I'm against, I believe in the assault weapons ban and I'm against AR-15s being so readily available, but then you're open-minded enough to go clay shooting with people in Goochland or Hanover.
Yeah, because that's fun.
That is a lost art. You're not seeing that much anymore. And I think by dint of, I was especially impressed. You were originally my congresswoman, the Virginia 7th. And it goes back to colonial times back then. You were the first Democrat to win it, I believe, since 1971, the first woman to ever win it. And then they go on and redraw your district. I couldn't make sense of all the farmland, the exurbs of DC. It's like they were making it ever more challenging for you to build a coalition to win. But you did it.
Yeah.
You did it thrice.
Yes.
And is there a recipe in that? You've said it's listening, it's pocketbook issues. What else is there? I mean, people are asking you about this because the party writ large is looking for a formula, a new way.
I think, for me, I love being with people, and I love learning about new places, and I love hearing people's stories, and I love hearing people's problems or challenges or what's working, and looking at, okay, well, what's working, what can be better, or what's not working, and how can we fix it? And even if I'm reflecting on some of the legislative successes that I had in Congress, the majority of them were actually grounded in stories that were told to me by constituents and issues raised to me by people I met along the way. And so, as I'm campaigning now for governor and building coalitions, you mentioned the lines of my old district, the former 7th and the current 7th, they are really interesting kind of cross sections. You have a little bit of everything, really rural agricultural communities and really urban suburban communities. One place it's traffic and the other place it's not traffic, right? But people are interesting everywhere you go. And, I think people want to be heard, and I want to hear people. And that sounds maybe even a little bit sort of overly simplistic, but it's also true. And so, when my district was redistricted, I had a lot of new people to introduce myself to. But it was a wonderful challenge. I did, along the way when people were districted, and Jerry Connolly loves it when I tell this story, but when I had some people who were districted from Jerry Connolly into my district, I had to tell people, no, I'm not primarying Jerry Connolly. He's not an option for you. You are I'm your Democrat. I'm so sorry. But that's the part that Jerry loves. Then the next part is where they learn to love me too. And so unfortunately, my successor is, I think, sometimes hearing a little bit, well, Abigail.
Help me get my head around Virginia. It was ruby red until, I think, 2008. Obama was the first Democrat to take it in a long time.
Yeah.
It has since been consistently in presidential elections blue. But Northern Virginia, I don't need to tell you, is a very different state from if you go down to Bristol or Roanoke or other areas. It's a large state. Tidewater is a different beast. I mean, even I think Steve Bannon has commented on the likes of Henrico and Chesterfield. It's such a cross-section that represents swing America. Yeah. It's really an indicator species.
Yeah. Well, and I think, if you're in Bristol or if you're in Tidewater, then, they're saying, oh, Northern Virginia is a different beast, right? And I think that perspective is important, because if you look at the size of our Commonwealth and the different industries that exist and the different kind of communities across the entirety of the state, there's such a richness. It's really incredible, but it is very, very different. But I think the richness of it is what I find so fascinating and exciting. And certainly, the Richmond area, Henrico, Chesterfield, they are bellwethers, because you've got the remaining farms that we still have in Henrico and Chesterfield. But, we were talking about it earlier before we started recording, I remember when the Taco Bell went in on Broad Street, and that was super exciting. And now
The short pump Taco Bell by the
short
Walmart?
pump Taco Bell, it was really exciting. I think
There was just an auto parts store across the street. And nothing else.
and the Walmart. I
Yeah.
think it was my first summer home from college, and the Taco Bell went in, and we were super excited about it. And it was open till midnight too. Yeah. So things change, but
So I do want to understand. I mean, and I'm drilling down on this. There are a handful of people out there. I don't know if they're called the Blue Dog Democrats. This vestige of something out there that is. There's no shame in reaching across the aisle or co-sponsoring things with other people or being opportunistic. I've always wanted to ask you. I'm fascinated by this. And this is full disclosure. Did you get permission to vote against Nancy Pelosi?
no.
Did she? No, I imagine that she, the emotional intelligence is high enough to say, I understand your district, and if you need to vote against me, that'll be okay. Just in the interest of keeping a coalition.
So I can't speak for her, but I will say, I like to live by the mantra of no surprises. So I certainly made her aware that I was going to be running television ads saying that I wasn't going to vote for her. And then when I got to Capitol Hill, I made clear, just so we're clear, I wasn't kidding. But I will say, I think it did surprise some people that I wasn't kidding. Very kindly, the late Congressman Bliley, I was visiting the Rotary Club of which he was a member, and I didn't realize that it was his particular club. So I was at this Rotary meeting, and when things started, a gentleman stood up from one of the back tables, and as he starts to stand up, I realize it's Congressman Bliley, my predecessor by a couple, and he says to the crowd something to the effect of, we have our disagreements, or et cetera, but you all should know, she didn't vote. She said she wouldn't, and then she didn't vote for Pelosi. And he made a very funny comment about how that certainly must not have been easy. And so I'll never forget it, because he had himself a good laugh as he announced that to the room. But the coalition aspect of things, working across the aisle. When I first came to Congress, President Trump was the president, and if you wanted to get a bill signed into law, I had to get the Republican-held Senate to bring it up for a vote. Even if I could get my side of the aisle, if Speaker Pelosi to bring a bill, then I needed to have the Republican-held Senate bring it, and then I needed to have a Republican president sign it. And so the broader the coalition you can build from the outset, the more likelihood that you're going to actually have success in that.
And yet there are specifically in Congress people who gravitate to becoming their own brands. An AOC is a rock star unto herself. And Instagram, and what she says, she's a household name.
Yeah.
And MTG can go straight to Insta, right? You don't have to be, you could just play for your own brand, and bipartisanship be damned. In the age of social media.
Yeah, I'm just not cool enough to have that be my path. So,
before we go to break, I have to ask you the $12 trillion question. Who is the leader of the Democratic Party right now? There's a bench. There's the usual suspects of people who show up, who are primarying. They're on a perpetual, discovery exploration campaign. But you have that weightless feeling that you similarly felt after 2016.
You know what, though? But I think that's exciting. I think that's exciting because we are a broad coalition, big tent party. And I think it's fun that if, whoever we've got great governors. Hope to add a couple more this time in Virginia and New Jersey. We have great members in the House and in the Senate. And here in Virginia, within our General Assembly, we've got some fantastic, really inspiring people in the House of Delegates and the State Senate. And so, I kind of like that it gets to be, a sort of a cornucopia. You choose who resonates most with you. And I think that's fine by me for the time being. And, 2028, we'll have a Democratic president, and certainly that person will be the de facto. But right now, I kind of like that there's, quite a bit of notoriety given to various different folks who I think are really interesting or inspiring, have strong backgrounds, and demonstrate different ways to lead, be it their states or their communities, or lead on Capitol Hill.
Full Disclosure Live, stay with us. All right. Hold on. Full Disclosure Podcast to NPR, Spotify, Apple, all the fine podcatchers. I've put them in one nice, neat link for you, fulldradio.com. Again, fulldradio.com. Please hit that smash button, all 300 of you. We are on Instagram at Robin Farzad. You can find me on Blue Sky, whoever's using that, on LinkedIn. This is all going to be posted on YouTube on our Full Disclosure channel. Holler if you too would like us on your air. We are on WVTF, Radio IQ, across the great Commonwealth, down in Asheville, North Carolina, on WPVM, out in California on KPPQ. My DMs are always open. Holler at me. If you are just joining us, we are live on stage with Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger, who's running for Virginia governor, election 2025. As you know, we structure these Full Disclosure Lives that the second half of the show is like a this is your life, how I built it inside the actor's studio. I'm really the poor man's version of that. But you talked about being 13 and the Taco Bell. But before we even get there, I met you at a friend's Hanukkah party.
Yes.
Someone I think you went to Tucker with, and we were flipping latkes. Maybe it was 2015.
Yes. I cannot confirm the year. 2015 or, yeah.
That sounds right.
Yeah. It was well before I was running for Congress.
So what was the impetus for you to run? What came together aligned? Because it was my district beforehand, and the largest upset, I would argue, in recent political history was Dave Bratt beating Eric Cantor, our congressman. Nobody saw that coming in 2014, and you came in and vanquished Dave Bratt.
Yes.
So when did it occur to you? And tell us about your experience and with this region. You were born in New Jersey, but you came here at age 13. You tasted the Taco Bell at the corner of Pouncey Tract Road.
We moved around when I was a little kid. Every couple of years with my dad's job, he was a career law enforcement officer, federal agent with the Postal Inspection Service. And so we moved around when he was working in Maine, in New York City, and in Philadelphia, and then came to Virginia, and we settled and stayed. And Richmond and the greater Richmond area and Virginia's been home ever since.
What was Short Pump like?
Back then, well, so I will say, and I don't know if my husband made it. He was dropping our daughter off at one of her sporting events, but for the longest time when we would drive down Broad Street, my husband would always say, "That's where I had my tree house that I built," like right where there's now a Dunkin' Donuts. And occasionally when he gets into that sort of mode where he tells all the stories about all of this used to be Broad Street. One time he got pulled over by the police because he and a friend were bicycling wood down the street in order to build said treehouse on Broad Street, which is now a Dunkin' Donuts. And occasionally I have to tell him, like, I know, I lived here too. But
was he a cow tipper or one of these now?
Well, so from my house where we lived, we used to walk through the woods. My sister, so I'm the oldest of three. My sisters and I would go through the woods. And now the sort of grocery store that's out in the front of the Wellesley neighborhood in Short Pump, there were a lot of cows. There was never any cow tipping, but we used to like go up to the fence line and like visit with the cows when we were younger. I don't know if my parents knew that.
And now, for anybody out there, you should share this in the various green rooms that you visit. Short Pump has the world's second largest Arby's.
Yeah.
To Colonial Heights. It's like a ski lodge. It's got everything.
Yeah.
Tacos are They're not sponsoring this show. I figured I'd just give it a shout out. But in addition to a Trader Joe's, a Torchy's Taco, I've eaten my way through Short Pump.
Yeah.
We have a Wegmans now. All this stuff would have been inconceivable to me when I was just visiting 20 years ago.
No, it was like, you got past like the Walmart, you got to Wellesley, and it was like the end of everything. And then you got to Goochland, which is also lovely. I used to represent Goochland. So just growing up, it was a great place.
You went to UVA.
Uh-huh.
And what did you major in, and what did you do afterwards?
French literature, and with foreign affairs minor. And the reason for that is, I was studying a variety of different languages in college, and that was the way that I could nurture my love of languages and my interest in foreign affairs. And then after I graduated from UVA, I moved to Germany. I spent the summer teaching English in northern Germany, in Hamburg, and then started a graduate program in Hanover, which is central Germany. That's my map of Germany. Central Germany. And I was in a dual degree program that's an MBA program from Krannert School of Management at Purdue University and the German International School of Management and Administration. That partnership it's no longer a dual degree program. The German school is now partnered, I think, with the Dutch school. But so I got my MBA there, and I was in Germany when 9/11 happened.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah, I was living in Germany when 9/11 happened. And my whole plan had been to spend time in Germany for a number of years. With my degree program, we got an automatic work authorization. And so I was doing a lot of I was doing a lot of job application because I came with the automatic work authorization. So I was applying to all these German jobs multinational companies based in Germany. And I had planned to stay in Germany for a couple of years, perfect my German, and then my long-term goal was to move back home and get a job with CIA. And I thought, this is the sort of experience I need to have before that's possible. And then when 9/11 happened, I thought, if this is where I want to be in 5 years, then this is what I should try and do now. And so I finished up my MBA and applied with the agency. I got a job offer relatively quickly. Within a couple months, I had a conditional offer of employment. And then my background check took a number of years, so it's good that I didn't
What can you and
build
can you,
in additional
what can you
time.
and can you not tell us about that? Because obviously people would have to be fascinated. It's like you go to a website, apply for jobs,
Yeah.
there's a background check, lie detectors, various references
Yeah.
that you need to have, and then do you get to pick where you go, or do you get to point them in a certain direction?
So I was undercover for my whole time with the agency, and I went through the process of getting my employment declassified. And so I had to kind of go through and get approvals of what the types of things I'm allowed to talk about. And then there's a number of books that have been written, so that's a helpful sort of guidance. No, the funniest thing is, when you first apply, and then you get this very strange, I think it was a letter in the mail that was like, please show up at this location. And so you show up at this location, and they're like, are you here for the thing you applied for? And everyone's very vague and confusing. I think so. And so you go in, and then and they do, at least at the time, they did a pretty strong upfront job of saying these are all this is what it is to work at CIA, and this is a reading list of all these books you should read, so you know what you might be getting into, and this is the life cycle of espionage. You're spotting, assessing, developing, recruiting, handling, right? And they give you all this sort of these things to think about, and then you might go to the next step. And so then I got through to the next step, and you show up at this nondescript office building, and they put you through all of these interviews where they say, okay, this is what's going to happen. In a minute, you're going to be at a restaurant, and they give you role playing things where you have to think on your feet, and then they start quizzing you on foreign affairs, and yeah, it was really interesting. And then you take the personality test, would you rather take a shower or bath, like, there was some movie, I think it was one of the CIA movies that came out where that was like in the movie. I'm like, that's real. It may be the only thing that's real, but that was actually true.
It feels like we used to do nefarious stuff. The CIA did in Chile, in Argentina, maybe Iran in the 1950s. But then, I've mentioned this in several episodes, Bill Burns, who recently left as head of the CIA, was very much a diplomat.
He was extraordinary as...
Very much a behind the scenes. I was struck. I didn't even know people like this existed.
Yeah.
Of that mean working behind the scenes using diplomatic suasion. And is it really just a case of Hollywood versus the mundane tasks of diplomacy?
I will say it's not mundane, and I think it's a question of sort of what are the outcomes that Hollywood sort of wants you to see, because the biggest intelligence successes that have occurred or will occur, I mean, you're never supposed to hear about them, right? I mean, sometimes you get little inklings of it, you know, a kind of horrifying but interesting one being, you know, the Taylor Swift concerts that were canceled throughout Europe because of threats to those, like that's an intelligence success, so to speak, is that, you know, there was a threat, it was very, very real, and they took action to make sure that there was no risk to anyone. And then even the provision of intelligence in the early days before Russia invaded Ukraine, that was an well-sourced, well-collected intelligence related to Russian plans and intentions that, you know, we, the American public, are aware of. In fact, the world's aware of it because there was a decision made to make that information, to declassify some of it and make it available, so that the Ukrainians would know what was coming. But, you know, it was very exciting. It was very interesting. Lots of paper, lots of writing, because every bit of information you collect, you have to transmit back to CIA headquarters.
And then when was your experience on Capitol Hill? Was it with Senator Robb?
Oh, so in high school, I was a Senate page. Yeah. In high school, I was a Senate page, and I was a Senate page for Senator Robb, but then you're just assigned. So I was on the Democratic side of the aisle because I was Robb's page, so I got to interact with all of them. But it was really a very, very exciting experience. I mean, you're 16, you go to school early in the morning, and then you go over to the Capitol and spend all day at the Capitol, and you get to know everybody's water preferences, because it's also your duty. Yeah. The first time I ever had sparkling water was after, you know, one of the senators really liked San Pellegrino, which was very fancy.
How could you walk me through 2017 and 2018?
Yeah.
And I mean, knowing that your family was going to be in the limelight at that point, maybe the conversation you had with your parents and your husband and the community about doing something that seemed so unlikely.
So there were a lot of interesting conversations. I think at the time, especially in 2017, when there was just this reaction to the 2016 elections, for me, there was a level of it that was deeply personal, right? So I had always, during my whole time with CIA, everything I'd been doing was collecting information so that somebody somewhere could make good, informed decisions, you know, in my case, related to national security. But then you see on Capitol Hill, we saw on Capitol Hill, people voting to take healthcare away from millions of Americans, not because that's informed, thoughtful policy, but because it was kind of an ill-informed campaign promise. And so in the early days, I think, of 2017, my husband and I were frequently having conversations about, somebody's got to run against Congressman Brett. Somebody's got to do it. And then over time, I thought, well, maybe I should do it. And I don't know that I really fully had a kind of a full understanding of all that I was embarking upon. I don't think I could have known, but I believed in it. And Adam believed in it. And so we were just like a snowball.
How do you build in like an internal exploratory committee? You've had various mentors in your life, people from the CIA, people from the experience on the Hill, people in Henrico, your husband's family, friends of friends, obviously the school. When you're sitting and drawing the Venn diagram of kind of how to build something from scratch, This is kind of a how I built it
Yeah.
element to
So it was interesting. In two particular cases, I had one friend, he married one of my college roommates, and when, he had always been a very vocal Republican, and we would sort of always kind of go back and forth over politics over the years. And then another friend who she's a kind of a couple years ahead of me, kind of in life and in her career, and was just always a dear friend, but a very good role model. And so both of them, just kind of separately, I reached out to them and I said, I'm sending this to you via email because I want you to ideally give me a thoughtful response. What do you think? And to my, dear Republican friend, like, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think of it? And to my friend who, working mom, devoted herself to national security, what do you think? And within a very short period of time, I got really lengthy, thoughtful emails back from them. And both of them, for very different reasons, said, like, you have to do this. And to hear it from someone who, I didn't know what I expected from my friend, who was a very strong Republican at that time. But I thought, you need to, this has always been my way, right? I like to hear from people I disagree with. And I thought that to some degree he was going to give me all of the reasons why I shouldn't. I totally misjudged that. But then, speaking with friends and with mentors and another Richmonder, the late Bill Royal, who had been very involved for many years in Republican politics before getting involved in Democratic politics, and I sat down with him and I said, I'm considering doing this. Like, what do you think? And, well, that was my plan, actually. I was going to meet with him because I was going to sit down with him and say, what do you think? And hear his take on things. But before we could have that conversation, I'll never forget it. I had arrived early, or I was walking over to where we were supposed to be meeting for coffee, and he pulls his car up and yells out of the window, "It's the next Congresswoman!" And I thought, I guess this conversation's going to be shorter than I thought. And so I think that how you build it, luckily, the 7th District of Virginia that was so kind of far down on the list of likely seats to flip that I didn't have a lot of eyes on me in the earliest stages of the campaign. And so I was building it in a way that I thought I would want to build a campaign. I didn't necessarily know what that had looked like. And as somebody who'd been under the Hatch Act for so long, I had volunteered once I got out of CIA and once I had moved back to Richmond, but I hadn't done a ton of campaign volunteering, or I hadn't been in the sort of inner workings of a campaign. So I just did things that I thought made sense. And we had so many extraordinary volunteers from like the earliest days. And I thought, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it because like enough people are pushing the snowball, up the mountain, that it'll become something. And so there wasn't a real recipe for it. And frankly, I'm glad of that, because I think if someone had said, like, this is how you run a campaign, I think elements of what it meant to flip a district that hadn't flipped in a very long time, I think if we had followed a set recipe, we might have really missed some of the secret ingredients that we happened upon along the way.
The fundraising part must be unpleasant.
Yeah.
The perennial fundraising, perennial campaigning, every 2 years, right? And then you immediately, like, once the bunting clears and the champagne from the night of, you're running again.
Yeah. No, it's not fun. But this is how I always sort of like think through it is, and it's always, we had the most expensive congressional race in Virginia history. Well, that sounds painful. No, but it's, it takes a lot to reach people. And in 2018 when I won, I know it was very much perceived on Capitol Hill that I wasn't supposed to win and that was a fluke. And so I knew there would be a big effort to unseat me. And so I had to be ready for it. And then in 22, we had redistricting. And so that was the chance to kind of be done with me. And then in 24, I didn't run for re-election because I was running for governor, but I wanted to make sure that we held the 7th. And so, all along the way, like it's for, right? The campaigns are for something. It's for the ability to lead legislation that would change people's lives or impact people's lives. And so that's on like the most aggravating or difficult of days, you remind yourself of that. And the conversations I always have with my daughters is that, I have over the years missed various things along the way, but I have told them very clearly, like there are plenty of parents who are missing tuck-in because they're working 2 or 3 jobs because they have no other choice. And if I have to miss bedtime from time to time so that I can be a part of an effort to make life better for that kid or that parent, I'm going to do it because, my kids are good. And they've got a support system. And so that's the what it's for that always drives me on the days when I want to run away and hide somewhere.
In the few minutes we have left, I have to ask you about the economy.
Yeah.
Inflation in particular, capital I inflation, the likes of which we saw in 2022, which it hadn't visited the United States since the late 70s and early 80s. That's very hard to put that back in the bottle. And it's very hard for people to understand, like if you knew what your 2019 price of a Tropicana orange juice was, you kind of expect if inflation's over that it's going to go back to that.
Yeah.
That it's not even cold comfort if the pace of inflation has moderated to the Fed's target. How do you have this conversation with voters and constituents?
Well, I think it comes with just a level of honesty, and also not only speaking in sort of the economic terms, right? So inflation slowed, that's great. Unemployment is low, that's great. But what is the actual impact on people's lives? How does it feel to go to the grocery store? How does it feel to go pick up your prescriptions? How does it feel to think you might want to move, but you don't know if you can afford afford rent in the place where you want to live, or if you'd ever be able to, even if you can sell the home that you're in, that's great, but can you now afford what you want to move into? And so I think part of the challenge of the larger discussion of everything is talking about it in terms of impact. And the impact is things are still expensive at the grocery store, right? I mean, cereal.
What do you tell someone about eggs? These are market. I mean, you talk about pocketbook issues, but they're exogenous things, bird flu, supply chain issues. Nobody wants to hear the boilerplate in the middle. They're just saying eggs used to cost $1.05.
And I think this is where, so the eggs are a totally different issue because of avian flu. This is very, very real. Egg prices, I mean, literally when you have entire flocks that are put down because of bird flu, your egg prices will go up. And that's a generational, in terms of chicken generations, that's a generational issue, right? And I think that people, the way that I talk about it is asking, what are all of the different impacts? Because, it isn't just the cost of eggs, right? Someone's talking about the cost of eggs. Well, we have a challenge with, avian flu. This is an issue. Eventually, those egg prices will level out to some degree.
The 59-cent short pump Taco Bell taco that you had as a 13-year-old is $2.50
I know.
now.
It's true.
And you'll always be anchored to the 59-cent taco. I don't care about core inflation or.
I don't know. I kind of remember them as the 99-cent menu, but.
Well, I guess I'm older.
I like the fancy things, I suppose. But this is where it becomes when the issue is childcare, right? And when you're paying more for childcare than you might be even bringing in after taxes, that's an impact of it. When you're not sure, what retirement could even look like, or if you're not sure, what opportunity exists for your kids, right? The larger discussion, and I think that this is sometimes where it becomes so reduced. If we're only talking in inflation's coming down. Well, yeah, as a measure of time over time, that may be true. But how does it still feel for people? And what are the choices?
Say, though, I'm going to fight for you to keep your ACA. I'm going to fight for child care protection or the earned income tax credit. I mean, at what point does it break through kind of the elite conversation or governmentese, if you will, into what people understand?
Even with the ACA, right? I think this is something that people very much understood with Medicaid expansion in Virginia as well. The more people who have coverage, the better it is for everyone. Because the reality is, if you walk into a hospital under a law put in place by Ronald Reagan, or signed into law by Ronald Reagan, like you will be given life stabilizing care. And so the impact on both the individual who may or may not have insurance or may not have coverage, but the larger community is clear.
So why isn't that especially poignant in a Mississippi and a Kentucky, in places that are overwhelmingly, you have a lot to lose from, Medicare being thinned out or Medicaid being thinned out or the lack of hospitals or OBGYN care. This is what I don't understand, especially with the results of the latest presidential election, with the rightward lurch of so many blue-collar people.
No, and I think that, Virginia's a good example of, I think, the opposite of that, right? Because when we saw in 2017 a whole crop of candidates who were running in the General Assembly for the House of Delegates, when they stepped forward and said, this is what it means to have Medicaid expansion, like working people who are working hard every single day, like to put food on the table, to pay for their family, to give themselves a good life, like working people will now have access to the peace of mind that comes with some level of healthcare coverage. And the impact on the larger community is important. And P.S., we are sending money to Washington year after year after year after year, and because Virginia has an expanded Medicaid, we are not getting any of that money back. Because we had people who made that argument, Medicaid expansion passed in Virginia with a bipartisan vote because they made it a discussion point. And so I look to some of the places that you mentioned where they haven't done Medicaid expansion. And it's unfortunate because the people who would best be impacted, they don't have, I would say, they haven't yet been lucky enough to have someone running for office who's explaining it to them the way that so many of the folks who were running in 2017 did. But it also requires a level of truthfulness, right? Like the housing affordability or housing availability crisis, and it how I'd classify it changes place to place. That problem didn't happen overnight. The overall issue of availability of reasonably priced homes that are sort of reasonable relative to what local salaries are, that started when the housing bubble burst and we stopped building the supply at the same level. And so, when I have conversations with people that say this problem was not created in a year, it's not going to be fixed in a year, but we're certainly not going to solve it if we don't try. And there's innovative things that different localities are doing, and there's different efforts that we could take on at the state level. Generally speaking, people recognize that some of these tough problems are ones that, people have to be on. When someone's being honest about the fact that this is a tough problem, it's not going to be quick to solve, but we need someone who actually wants to try. The response to that type of discussion, I think, is really a good one. And we heard everything about November. It's the cost of eggs. It's prices, prices, prices. And you turn on the news, and the administration is doing everything except trying to bring down costs for everyday Americans.
Congresswoman, we've already gone over time with you, and I do want to get to the reception, but I think by the bylaws of the Virginia Museum of History and Culture, if we get your father and the mayor and the school superintendent to agree, look, full disclosure, we like to give you more in a time of shrinkflation for your podcasting dollar. So if I get all hands to give me an extra 5 minutes, 5 minutes. Say aye, say aye, say aye, say aye. You're term limited if you win governor. I guess that's just the end of the line for you then. I mean, you've hit, what are you going to do? You're still young.
It's so funny that you say that. So on Capitol Hill, all of my friends are saying, oh my gosh, Virginia has a one-term governor. Isn't that terrible? And I say, no, it's amazing. You have 4 years. You run hard. You have to have a strong plan. You have to be ready the day after. And while you're there, no one will ever say, oh, but in your re-election, you just do what you think is right. And then you take a really long nap, and I get through my reading list. 2030.
Final question for you. I always do this. It's a stunt here, but who should we have on this show live in Bigley in Virginia? Your call. Jump ball.
Do they have to be a Virginian?
No.
Okay. I'm going to limit myself to a Virginian, though. My favorite former constituent, who likely doesn't know that he's my favorite former constituent, shabuzi.
Here's the deal. If you're saying it on the record, you have to make it happen. You have to, what are the terms? The Gen Z's like, can you manifest shabuzi for us in Northern Virginia? Do you have like a speed dial shabuzi that you can?
No, I don't. So, but like in my former life as a congressperson, every point of pride are all the sort of interesting people that we represent.
Well, could you work the CIA Rolodex for us to get shabuzi?
There could be some interesting people.
I'm putting you on the spot. Shabuzi, you got to come on Full Disclosure Live. I guess we could have an intervention. Thank you, Congresswoman. I really appreciate this. You're generous with your time.
Thank you.